A couple things before we get started. I've got about 45 minutes to tell you hacker stories, basically. I've got to give you a little bit of a heads up. I'm Kevin, and as I present, I'm going to talk about different things. And the main focus of today's talk is to discuss attacking satellite systems. Makes sense at a conference like this one, right? It would make no sense to talk about hacking social media at the satellite show. I mean, it might. Everybody's got social media sites. But as I talk, I'm going to describe different risks, different attacks, different things like that. And I tend to forget two words when I tell the stories. And those two words are with permission. I am a professional hacker. That is my job. I am hired by companies to break in, steal stuff, tell them their baby is ugly, and go home. And the reality is, everybody's baby is ugly. We don't like to admit that, but newborn babies are weird looking. They don't have kneecaps, their skulls aren't connected, they're squishy humans. We lie to new parents because if we didn't, people would not reproduce. Right? And I have two kids, and they know I say this. So it takes about 3 to 4 months for a new baby to look real, to look normal. So when we go, oh, it's adorable, we're lying. Just plain and simple, right? And the reality is when I look at your systems, they're newborn babies. I'm sorry. I know that you've sweated over them, you've bled over them, you've built all this stuff, and you're very, very proud of the systems you build. They're newborn babies. It's just the way it works. The other thing I want to tell you is that I have a sense of humor. Now, having said that, I want to clarify something because I bet you at least one person in this room heard that I said I had a good sense of humor. You added a word. I did not say that. I have a sense of humor. My favorite joke, a joke I made up, is, do you know why Walmart wasn't hacked? They weren't a target. See? Sense of humor, not right? I actually got an opportunity to introduce the CISO of Walmart at an event like this. So I told that joke as part of his introduction. He wouldn't shake my hand. Right? Like he walked on stage, I went like this, and he went and walked around me. I'm like, wait a minute, man, you got the good side of the joke. I said you were, oh. So those are my warnings for today. So let's get started. Who am I? There we go. I'm Kevin. I'm not real excited about being Kevin. I've been Kevin for 52 years. I've been Kevin Johnson for 18 less than that. You can do the math. Yeah, I'm not going to do the math. I am the founder of Secure Ideas. We are a penetration testing company out of Jacksonville, Florida. We've been in business for 15 years, which is kind of weird because we were in an accident, and I'm not a business person. Our job, like I said, is to break in and show you what attacks are like. I'm also an IANS faculty, and I do a lot of open source stuff. Here is the main thing that we do. It's not the hacks. It's understanding risk, right? Most people we have found over time is that most people don't actually understand what hackers really do. And so our job is to show you what hackers do against your systems so that you can make them better. That simple, okay? It's really easy. I would like to say that my job is very difficult and requires an amazing skill set, and everybody that works for us, all 32 people around the country, are wizards. The reality is we are glorified QA people. The difference between us and an actual QA person is what we do with the results. QA people find a bug and they tell you about it. Hey, that's broke. You want to fix that. We find a bug and we giggle, and then we figure out what we can do with the bug to move to the next step, okay? So what we're going to talk about is we're going to give you a little bit of an introduction, then we're going to focus on the 3 main components that we look at and the 3 main risk categories that happen. And I will throw out there that I have zero problem with questions throughout the talk. You don't have to wait to the end. If you have a question, you can either stand up to the microphone and speak into that, or you can say it out loud, and if I hear you, I'll repeat it and try to answer it. My answer may be, damn, I don't know, but I will give you an answer. Does that make sense? So feel free. I don't like monologuing. I am not a stand-up comedian, as I've already shown. So I don't know about you all, but I assume because you're in this room that space fascinates you. Right? I mean, it really is fascinating. It blows my mind how small we are, right? You know, like growing up, and I'm old, I'll admit that. Growing up, the world was huge. And then somebody introduced me to space. And they said, look at that. And it was like, wow. And we've barely touched it, and you know that, right? I am not a flat earther. Makes sense, right? I actually watch lots of flat earther videos because they're hilarious, which is bad because it messes with my algorithm. I will tell you that the easiest way to not succeed at presenting at NASA is to tell the joke. I was actually at Goddard Space Center. I was doing a presentation to a room of literal rocket scientists, and I thought I would start with a funny joke. So I asked them to show me the fake moon landing site after I was finished. I thought it would be hilarious, right? Because who presents at NASA and believes we faked the moon landing? No, of course not, right? They did not think it was funny. But here's the thing, and this is one of the reasons why space fascinates me, is because as a hacker, as somebody who explores what we can do with systems and applications and networks and people, the aspect of exploring space fits the hacker's credo, right? Which is one of the reasons why, as I walk around here and I talk to people, and we had a booth and people would talk to us at the booth, and it was amazing to me how many people I talk to that believe space is unhackable. Satellites are unhackable, right? And I want to be clear, the idea of unhackableness did not work for Oracle. It will not work for you, right? We see people who just don't understand what the threat is. And this is not to scare you, right? I believe that FUD is evil. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? It's a sales technique, like, oh my God, you're gonna get hacked if you buy my product, right? Like that bullshit, right? Excuse me. By the way, I've been told that I speak fluent sailor with a trucker accent, so I should have apologized in advance. But I actually had somebody walk up to our booth yesterday, and it seemed like a really nice guy, and I'm talking to him, and I will admit it, right? I am biased. I believe security is important. One reason, it pays my mortgage, right? But so I'm talking to this guy, and the guy says, oh, no, there's no reason to talk to me. And I'm like, okay, yeah, screw you too, hippie. I don't know. And he's like, and I thought like his idea was that he was no reason to talk to him because he was not a decision maker. And I'm a really bad business person. I'll be blunt. I don't care if you're a decision maker. I'm not trying to sell you something. I just like talking to people. I really don't like talking to people, but I do like to, that's like weird nerd thing, right? So I'm talking to the guy and I'm like, why was there no reason to talk to you? And he says, well, because I don't need pen tests anymore, or penetration tests anymore. I said, you don't need them anymore? Like, what does that mean? And this guy goes, well, when I used to build networks here on Earth, which I'll be honest, that sounds pompous to say out loud, and I know how realistic it may be, but it really comes across narcissistically or something, right? But it's like, when I used to build networks here on Earth, I worried about hackers, and I would do I would have a penetration test done. But now that I work on satellites, there's no reason to do a pen test because it doesn't have networks and things like that. We just use applications. And I'm like, and I've paraphrased it badly, but it was like, you're ignorant. And I want to be clear that unlike social media, I believe that ignorant is not an insult. right? Stupid is an insult. Ignorant is that you don't know that you don't know. You have something and you're not aware of what it is, right? And that's fine. Now, what is stupid is when you're presented with the ability to learn something and then you choose not to. Then I can get to insult you. And you get to insult me back, right? But the idea of, well, we're not hackable, that's bad. And the reason of this is that people don't really understand risks. Contrary to the number of us that played Risk as kids with the little plastic pieces, people don't understand risks. I'll give you an example, and I've used this example a lot because I think it's a good one. I'm out in Denver, and I'm keynoting an event out there on application security. And we're in this conference center, and I asked the audience, and there was like 400 or 500 people. I'm like, great. How many of you are afraid of sharks? Right? And a whole bunch of people raised their hand. And I said, no. I don't mean, are you afraid of sharks as like Jaws scared the crap out of me as a kid? I mean, I am actively afraid of being bitten by a shark. And like half of the room kept their hand up in the air. And I said, do you guys realize we're in Denver? It's called the Mile High City because it is a mile above sea level. The chance of you being bitten by a shark in Denver is almost zero. As far as I know, the only way to be bitten by a shark in Denver is if they are transporting a shark from one aquarium to another aquarium and you ram that truck, right? I was corrected later. It is possible to be bitten by a shark in Denver, but you have to pay for the opportunity. You can pay to dive in the aquarium. Okay, there is a risk there. Do you know what kills more people a year than are bitten by sharks? Bitten, not killed, bitten by sharks in the United States. Do you know what kills more people? Lightning may, I don't know. Lightning may. Anybody else? I'm sorry? Oh, cancer definitely does. Cancer scares the shit out of me. But it's not something most people wouldn't think of. Vending machines. Soda machines kill more people a year than sharks bite. And I don't mean via diabetes. I mean from the soda machine falling on the person because they're shaking it to get money or soda out of it. The thing collapses on them. But Discovery Channel doesn't have a soda machine week. And if you're like, well, screw those people, they were stealing from the soda machine, I'm going to judge you, but let's just say that's your opinion. Cows kill more people a year than sharks. No, not when they tip them, just in general. Maybe when they tip them, I don't know. Cows. But would you watch Cow Week on Discovery Channel? No. Well, you might. Be kind of cool, maybe. But it's because people don't understand risk. People don't understand what really is worrisome to them. Like, one of the things I ask all the time is, what keeps you up at night? What scares you from a security perspective? And I have people say to me, well, I'm afraid of those hackers stealing my social security number. Really, my social security number is 591-523693. I don't have a problem sharing it. Do you know why I have no problem sharing it? Because the hackers already have. OPM has lost it, 3 times publicly? You can Google my social security number. That's a problem. But social security numbers don't scare me. Credit cards don't scare me. I worry about different things. What are you worried about? What is the sensitive data that you are concerned about in your system? Is it intellectual property? Is it source code? Is it data? Is it communication? Right? In security, in InfoSec, in cybersecurity, whatever term you want to use for us, what we focus on is a triad. CIA. And I know. I mean different words. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are the 3 things that we worry about at varying levels based on the system. And what I find is this is actually an easy way to assess things. Are you in this whatever? This transaction, this system, this application, this hardware, which of those 3 are the most important to you? Are you most worried about confidentiality, right? Like I'm transmitting stuff I don't want people to be able to see. I don't want people to be able to read. Well, then confidentiality is your most critical thing. And when we're talking about, those satellites we don't talk about and images being sent down, confidentiality is probably the most important thing there, right? Because if somebody gets access to what we're looking at, they know information, confidentiality is important. Integrity is important. I don't mean don't lie to people, because that's a default. Don't lie to people. But by integrity, I mean that the data we transmit or the system that we're depending on is a trustworthy system. That in that transmission or in that storage or in that processing, we did not change what we had. Communications, integrity is very important. May not be the most important, that depends on your system and what you're worried about, but integrity is. If I'm able to say, buy that item, and the message gets to the other end and says, don't buy that item, or vice versa, or if we are sending control signals to a device in space, we probably want integrity of the messages to be the most important thing. Because if the messages can be modified so that the device flying around the Earth does something different, I don't want to make fun of anybody, but that potentially means it tips over at landing. Could, I don't know, right? But integrity at that point is the most critical thing. And the third one is availability, right? And we all know availability. Is the ground station available to the satellite as it goes across? Because, as we all know, I assume, they're not always. They're not always there, right? I always remember the very first time I saw, oh man, I don't even remember the name of the movie, and I'm going to feel dumb because you're going to point out that it was like Apollo 13. But like when the when the orbiter went around the moon and it went behind the moon where we couldn't talk to it, and then there's that period, right? Okay, we're going to get it. Or when you watch the launches and as they go up and they hit that point where they just don't talk to us for a little bit, right? How are we handling that? Do we get that connection back? That's availability, right? And is that the most critical thing for you? And I can't tell you what is most important, but I will tell you this: one or more of the three are important to you. And you have to think about what that means. But what are the actual threats? Like the gentleman I talked to yesterday, who was like, oh no, I have no threats. Okay, well, if you think you have no threats, then you haven't walked around a city lately. But the reality is the threats exist. And some of those threats are nation states that want information. And some of those threats are nerds stereotypically living in their parents' basement, eating leftover pizza, playing WoW, and deciding that World of Warcraft isn't exciting enough, so let's screw with a satellite. And you know I'm right. Sad part is they're not so stereotypical nerds in their parents' basements. They're people like me just hanging out with cool computers. Because I will tell you right now, being able to say, I fucked with a satellite, is bragging rights. And I will also tell you that if the mission fails, there is not much difference in a mission failure due to a nation state or due to Joe Hacker. Either way, it's a mission failure. Now, yes, we can talk about what the ramifications of the result and the next thing is, and the nation state's worse. But Joe Hacker has plenty of time. We're bored. And when you have a bored hacker on your network, you have a problem. It's just basically this way it works. And do you know what those threats are? Do you actually know where the threats can get in? Do you know the ingress points for those attacks? And that's where we get at, right? Most people who talk about satellites and security and hacking talk about the really high up devices. I will be honest, those are fun. They really are. And you guys do know the rule, right? If a hacker likes something, get it the hell off your network, right? And I'll just say I love SharePoint. It's one of my favorite softwares out there, so thank you very much. I also love Linux. And I know. We use Linux because it's secure. That's so adorable. But the devices flying around Earth or wherever are the interesting devices, but the least commonly targeted device. Okay? As an attacker, this is not where I'm going to spend most of my time. This may be my ultimate goal. Like we talk about bragging rights, right? Being able to brag that I took over a ground system is not real exciting. Being able to say, ha ha ha, I took over a ground system is the same thing as saying, ha ha ha, I hacked Windows XP. It's not hard, right? Most people want to talk about hacking the actual satellite. But the reality is the ingress points to the satellite go through the other two parts we're about to talk about, right? And so it is mostly the ultimate target. And I don't mean that every attack is going to end up on a satellite. I just mean that if we're attacking the satellite directly, we have already compromised either communications or the ground station, right? Plain and simple. That the satellite is almost never the initial foothold, which makes sense because I can't just drive up to it, right? Like I have literally broken into buildings to steal servers. I can't, with permission, I can't do that with a launched device. Now, I could beforehand, right? And we can talk about nation-state efforts to take control of the device before it launches. There are aspects where we will attempt, and this is one of the reasons why your components have to be evaluated, right? What is your SBOM? What is your hardware bill of material, right? Software bill of material, hardware bill of materials in general. What are you leveraging? Can I get into the systems before you place it on the device, right? One of my favorite things to look at is where you are pulling source code that's going to run on the device. Because there is almost a guarantee that part of the source code you are pulling is coming from a GitHub repo somewhere available on the internet, done by a third party that you don't know who they are because their GitHub name is Banjo37, right? And by the way, if there really is a Banjo37, I don't know what they are, okay? I've made that up on the spot, right? I always worry about when I make up usernames and domain names that somebody's going to go to them and be like, oh my God, Kevin, and I just made it up, okay? But this is, when we talk about the devices themselves, most of our efforts are focused on what is being loaded onto the device, how is the device managing that, right? And so one of the things that we've done, one of the things, sorry, I'm buffering. We should all be familiar with that. One of the things we look at when we're hired to assess an actual satellite or the components being put into a satellite is we look at what it is built from. So for example, and this is a play around example, but I have 3 different CubeSats on my desk at the office right now. Those CubeSats, I will say entirely, the 3 I'm looking at, are entirely built off of publicly available open source software that is being built by random people on the internet. And I am a huge open source fanatic. I love open source. I do not want you to walk out of this room and say, I heard from a hacker today and he said don't run open source shit. That is not what I'm saying, okay? Because I will tell you right now that every operating system out there is hackable. The question is, how well did you lock it down? How well did you evaluate it? Okay? Because I can make a Windows machine more secure than other people can make a Linux box. I can also make a Windows machine less secure than other people can make a Linux box, right? It all depends on my skill set, my knowledge, and my attention to detail as I build it. So we evaluate these things. As I'm looking at these CubeSats, right? In multiple cases, I have found where the CubeSat is loading malicious software onto the CubeSat already. And they're not doing it on purpose. That was an edge. Yo, I appreciate that, man. I don't want you to have to catch me, is the point, right? So I'm looking at these 3 CubeSats. All 3 of them load software that makes use of libraries where the library has been abandoned by the original developer and a new developer has taken it over, and we have found cases where they're injecting crypto miner software and things like that into the library. Now, I will let you know right now that crypto mining on a satellite is probably not the most effective way to do crypto mining, right? This is not a case where they took control of a library to attack a satellite. This is actually blowback or scatter, where the attacker has taken control of a library that's used in lots of places, and the satellite also makes use of it. Does that make sense? If you're running Linux, right? Just picking on Linux because of the open source nature, right? If you're running Linux, you're running a similar version to Linux that I'm running on my workstation, right? This is not a targeted attack. This is not a, let's take control of this library to take control of satellites. This is a, let's take control of this library because it's used on 400 million computers worldwide. I'm sorry? Exactly, lateral damage, right? Now, we have also seen where libraries have been taken over that are specific to satellites, right? And those are targeted attacks. Those, in all of the ones that I'm aware of, they are actual nation-state attacks, where a nation-state has worked for up to years to take control of supporting libraries and third-party libraries so that as the satellite devices and systems are built, they have control of those systems. That's the one that, for me, I'm less afraid of. And I hate to say that. I'm less afraid of that because when people build the satellite-specific softwares, they tend to do a better job, not great, but better job of evaluating the other satellite-related libraries. Like, people will really examine the source code of that satellite-related library, but they won't examine the source code of that library that beautifies the code so it makes sure that documentation and notes are run, right? And you laugh, so you know the beautifiers, right? People don't look at that code. How many people here believe that their engineering department is actually looking at the compiler's code, not the code the compiler generates, I mean the code of the compiler itself? How many people have evaluated that? How many people believe that the compiler company or software or group has been looked at by somebody who cares about security? Right? I don't know. But that's what we talk about there. So, like I said, higher components, they're important. They are interesting. They are something we have to think about security, but they are almost never the initial attack vector. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's talk about the communication paths. This, I believe, and I want to be clear, 83.6% of all stats are made up on the spot. But including that one. In my experience and my opinion, the communication paths are the most commonly attacked part of the system and often the least commonly evaluated part of the system. The number of times I have heard in the last 2.5 days, well, we use 5G, so we're not worried about people listening in. I don't know why 5G has gotten this idea. Like, well, let me rephrase that. 5G doesn't have the idea. But I don't know why people have this idea that 5G communications are encrypted by default, uninterceptable. I'm not even sure that's a real word, but let's go with it. And secure. The last time I looked at 5G interception hardware, it costs less than $300, and it is available on Temu. And while I'm not making fun of Temu, I'm making it clear that this is available to random consumers on the internet. This is not go to cool, lead, Uber hacks or toolkits. This is go to walmart.com and buy 5G interception hardware. Okay? It is also, according to my lawyer, illegal to buy in the United States directly without specific mechanisms to do it. There are ways to be allowed to buy this legally, right? But if you do just go to walmart.com and say, hey, Kevin said I could buy 5G interception stuff here, please understand, I am not liable for you breaking the law. Okay? Talk to your lawyer, because I paid mine, you should pay yours. I paid mine way too much money. Do you know how difficult it is to find a lawyer that will represent a business whose job it is to break the law, except having a contract means it's not illegal? When we started the company 15 years ago, I had multiple attorney firms hang up on me. Call them up, hey, I'm starting a company, I need an advisor to evaluate my contracts. Oh, really, what do you do? Well, we do, and I learned. I say things like, we do penetration testing. And the lawyer's office will say, what is penetration testing? And it'll boil down to, well, we're hackers. Click. You know that's illegal. Not if you wrote the contract correctly, but, right? So you got to be careful. But what we find is that most people look at their communication paths, and I'm talking about the signals, right? The RF signals. And they're like, oh, that's okay. Nobody can see it. You're right. I can't look up and go, whoa, a signal. But I don't have to, right? I have hardware that will intercept it for me. And it wasn't expensive, and it's not hard to run. I can run it, and I'm an idiot, right? And we see times all the time, let's go with it, right? We evaluate systems constantly where they don't encrypt any of the traffic that goes across the channel because they assume that it's encrypted in transmission by default. And it's not. The other one we hear all the time, and I want to be very clear, if you say this to me and you are serious, I will make fun of you in the next talk I give. If you say to me, we can't encrypt the traffic because the hardware in space is not powerful enough to decrypt the traffic. That's not true in almost every case. You may have made the choice not to use the hardware to decrypt the traffic, but it is not because the hardware is incapable of doing it, right? Decryption of traffic, depending on the encryption you use, is relatively inexpensive computationally. And we have heard for decades, across the board, not just in satellites, oh, Kevin, we can't encrypt that traffic. Do you know how heavy that is? Look, man, I'm fat. That's the problem, not your encryption, okay? The other thing we see a lot of times is we use things that we believe are encryption that aren't encryption. I don't know how many people here are aware of base 64 encoding. Base 64 encoding is a way to take data, binary data or not binary data, and convert it into a plain text safe format. It's just an algorithm. It's just math. They take the input, they convert it, and you have output. And that output looks encrypted if you don't know what you're looking at. If you're just reading and going, oh man, I can't read that, it must be encrypted. Base 64 can be coded with a paper and a piece of pencil. Piece of paper and a pen, whatever. A piece of the pencil. You don't even need the whole pencil. Right? And we see this all the time where we'll evaluate systems and the communication path will base 64 encode the string, the data, to send it. And that actually makes sense because we want to be able to transmit it safely. And by safely, I mean not have like control characters in it or stuff like that, right? If you think the easiest explanation is here is anybody who used to play with modems, right? Do you remember ATZ? And we would tell people, yeah, just type in ATH, and we should hang up, right? You don't want the control codes to be translated by the device in space as a control code if you didn't mean for it to be. And the reality is that graphic, that binary text, that whatever, right, may have characters in it that are control codes. We've actually seen lots of cases as we test systems where we can send non-malicious traffic that the device is using as just data and have it interpreted as a control command to the satellite, right? And so a common way to handle that is to base64 encode or encode in some other fashion, which defangs that control code, right? Here's the problem. The developer or the person evaluating it looks at that and says, look at that traffic. That traffic's encrypted. The problem is it's not. And here's the example I always give. I don't speak French. I don't. I can't. As you guys can tell, I barely speak English. I don't speak French. So if you and you both speak French to each other, I will have no idea what they're saying. None. I'll just be like, oh, okay, whatever. But that doesn't mean French is an encryption standard. French is decryptable. It's encoded. It's encoded in a different language, but all I have to do is find somebody who understands that language and say to them, what the hell did those two say? And they'll repeat it to me, if they know French correctly, unlike that sign language lady that was going around for a while. Do you remember her? That was sad and hilarious at the same time. But we see this very often with communication paths. The other thing, so we've talked about integrity and availability, right? Integrity and confidentiality. When we talk about encryption, it covers both of those, right? Because part of encryption, if it's done correctly, is to verify the integrity of the messages. It also protects the confidentiality of the messages. But the other part of communications is the availability. I'll be honest. I actually, if I am malicious and I don't like you, and I'm evil, not professionally evil, because that implies a contract, but just plain evil, I actually don't need to know what traffic you're sending to that satellite. I don't need to know what traffic is coming back from that satellite to screw with you. I can interfere with that traffic. I can jam it. I can override it. I can spray noise through it, right? We can perform denial of service attacks against your communication paths. That then means that if that's your biggest worry, you need to figure out ways around that, right? The most common one, backups. And I don't mean you have a whole bunch of tape drives up in the satellite. I mean, you either have multiple communication paths or you transmit the data multiple times, right? We're going to send this down 16 times with the hope that you'll finally get all of the data sometime in the 16 times, right? Way too often with systems, we see they transmit the data once and they're done. Or they transmit it twice or 3 times really quickly and they're done, right? That's a problem if availability is the most important part of your communication path, right? We watch this constantly when we talk to systems. So the two big problems here, and like I said, we've seen both, and we continue to see both, is either the data is unencrypted, and so confidentiality and integrity is invalid. And keep in mind that integrity is an important one there, right? If you're sending internet's down. If you're sending up command instructions and they're going up in plain text, how does the satellite know that you're who's sending them? That's the integrity of that communication. Because if I can just broadcast louder or get it there first, right, what happens? Okay? So that's the communication paths. The final one we see, and remember I said with communication paths, it's the most often overlooked. This is the one that is the most often tested, but what I have found is that it is very often not tested correctly. And I'll explain that in a second. And this is the ground station. The whether that's the system and software that's receiving the communication, or it's the control system that's sitting in your office or in your launch center or whatever, where they're looking at the stuff, they're evaluating the results. What we see is that ground control, all of a sudden that song just popped into my head. Exactly, it's awful. But the ground control stations are very, very often ridiculously insecure. Those systems are looked at quite often. And bluntly, in many cases, they're just web applications that are running on a server, APIs that you can interface with. And this is why I say they're they're often tested wrong. Is because people sit down and they test them the exact same way they would test that WordPress site, or they test, right, like the random application somebody built. And don't get me wrong, the techniques are the same, right? I'm going to go and evaluate your ground systems and everything else the same way that I'm going to evaluate your SaaS software and what have you. Where the mistake is made is that many of the people who have tested these things don't understand how the system is going to be used, okay? So what we find is that somebody will test a system and they'll say, oh, hey, right here is a cross-site scripting vulnerability. It's the ability for an attacker to inject code that will run on the workstation of the user of this interface. And it's like, yeah, you're right. That is a vulnerability. And I'm not saying not to worry about that. But what we find is that the testers don't actually understand the way that we would attack that in a ground station. On a normal website, like if I found a cross-site scripting fault, if I had permission, right, or if I was evil, and I found a vulnerability for cross-site scripting on CNN.com, right, my focus is going to be the client itself. So the user that goes to CNN.com, I'm going to attack them, right? And the reason I'm going to attack them via CNN.com is because, bluntly, I don't give a shit what they do in CNN. But that user has a bank account on that same computer, right? And so I'm going to attack that user to gain access to their bank account. I would like to believe, I know I'm not correct in all cases, but I would like to believe that the people that are managing your satellite systems and launch systems and stuff like that are also not online banking on the same browser that they're managing the systems. I did say, I can't say that all the time, but I would like to believe that's not the thing. When I test a ground control system, what I look for is not lateral movement to the user and out. What I look for is lateral movement from that functionality to other functionality in the ground system, right? My pivot is through the application into the application, not through the application to the user and into another application. Does that make sense? And because very often the testing, which bluntly very often is done just by running automated tools against it, that's not a real pen test. The focus is on that user attack. And so when you give those results to the developers and the managers of those systems and say, you need to fix this, they look at it and say, well, I'm not really worried about that. Who cares if they can get into online banking through our system? Nobody, you see what I mean? And so because they don't understand, because the attacker, the tester, didn't understand the usage, they mess that up. And so what we see very often is that there are vulnerabilities in ground systems, there are vulnerabilities in the applications you are running in your network, on your system, that people aren't fixing because they don't understand that the vulnerability is actually real. The other thing that we see And I hear this one all the time. I'm not worried about my ground system because they're air-gapped, right? And it is impossible to jump from that computer to that computer via an air gap, which is what they said for Stuxnet, but that's a different conversation, right? I will tell you right now that, and this is a made-up stat, but I think it's pretty close, okay? I will bet you that 75 to 80% of the systems your organization believes are air-gapped are not. Time and time again, when we go into systems, that's what we're finding. That's an air-gapped network. Really, that's weird because that Cat5 cable goes out through that wall over there into that switch that all those workstations are plugged into, right? We have actually tested systems where the SCIF, and I hope you heard the quotes in italics around SCIF there, were plugged in, the devices inside the SCIF were actually plugged into the corporate network, which makes it not a SCIF. We tested a, how do I say this politely? A weapons and satellite manufacturer, might be the right way to say it. We were on site, we were scheduled to be on site for 2 weeks. At lunch on Monday, we were sent home because we had already compromised enough of their system that they were actually worried that we were going to be able to get onto the cleared network. Yeah, we did not, as far as we know, get onto the cleared net. I want to make that very clear. Pun intended. Actually, it wasn't intended. Yeah, we were on a call with the CIO, and we were explaining what we were doing, and he was like, okay, well, are you going to do this next? And I said, and I'm being vague on purpose, I said, no, I think you misunderstood me. We did that 6 steps ago. We're here. We are talking directly to this domain controller from your guest wireless network. And he stopped talking for a good 30 to 60 seconds and then said, thank you very much, Kevin, go home. And I'm like, I'm sorry? He said, go home, now. Yep, yeah, you're done, write up the report, we'll pay you, get the fuck out of my office, right? And that was because the systems that they believed were air-gapped were not. Very, very often, systems are air-gapped when they're built. And then somebody has a brilliant idea that accounting needs access to data from that system, right? Well, hey, especially as we move more and more commercial launches, right? We have to pay for those. We have to get paid for them. And I'll be blunt, I am a capitalist. I like the idea of profits. And so my accounting people, I want them to have all the data they need to bill people. And all of a sudden we're not air-gapped anymore. I know that I'm making up this stat, but it's being made up from experience, and I believe it's right that 75 to 80% of air-gapped systems are no longer air-gapped, right? And that's actually a hard one to see very often, because everybody works from the assumption that it really is. I'll give you an example that I can talk about freely, but it's not a satellite system, it was a power grid. We were at a power company, and they wanted us to test their OT network. We're talking about power transmission and distribution for a very large portion of the United States. We sit down with them. It was a collaborative exercise. We do a lot of that, where we'll talk and work with you and actually build an understanding of things, which is important. We don't just drop us and go hack stuff, right? We actually work with you. So we're working with them, and the guy I'm working with says, okay, well, let me get connected into the OT network. I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, we have a Bastion host because everything's air-gapped. And let's be clear, if you have a Bastion host, everything is not air-gapped because you're able to get to the Bastion host. Like, that's to be clear that by definition, you cannot have a Bastion host on an air-gapped network. And so he tries to connect to the Bastion host. He gets connected. All of a sudden, the machine crashes. I'm like, oh, shit. What are you going to do? He said, oh, this happens all the time. I'll open up a ticket to IT, they'll fix it, we'll be able to use it again. I'm like, oh, cool, how long does that take? He goes, oh, 24 to 48 hours. I'm like, dude, what are we going to do until then? He's like, don't worry about it. And he proceeds to start connecting directly to the OT devices, the operational technology devices. He's actually connecting to power transformers. He is connecting to generators. He's connecting to the systems. And I look at him, I'm like, hey, I got one small question. How? He's like, oh, yeah. We put a firewall in place, but we could never get the rules working correctly. So it's open, but everybody has just agreed that if the Bastion host is available, use it. And I said, what? Yeah. If the Bastion host is running, use it. If it's not, just connect directly. We find that all the time. Okay? So, I ran over. I'm sorry. I'm 5 minutes past. I apologize. Are there any questions I can answer? Things to throw, whatever? Yes.
Thank you. How do you balance out the right amount of encryption versus the traffic you send in? Because you also have to worry about latency, for example.
Yep, latency is an issue. So the question is, how do I balance the amount of encryption based on the type of traffic I'm getting, because we have to worry about latency and stuff like that? And the answer to that is, depends. I know, it's a consulting answer, right? It all depends on what the system is doing. My preference is encrypt everything, okay? That's my preference. The thing that many people worry about is latency in communication. The transmission of encrypted data is almost always as fast as in transmitting unencrypted data. It's the data size, the packet sizes are about the same depending on the type of encryption you use. So communication latency isn't going to be made worse. The transmission latency, is not going to be made worse by encrypting it. Where the latency will possibly be made worse is in the actual act of encrypting it. And if that's where your latency issue is, what you want to look at is, you want to look at stream encryption instead of block encryption, right? Because stream encryption is almost always faster. You're going to look at symmetric encryption instead of asymmetric encryption because it's faster to run. But it all depends on what your real concern is. And so what we find the best systems for encrypting is to use asymmetric encryption. Many people think of this as public-private key encryption. So asymmetric encryption for the initial communication. And what you encrypt there is a symmetric key so that your transmission can switch from asymmetric to symmetric for the rest of the communication. This is exactly how HTTPS works on the web, right? We use asymmetric encryption to start the encryption, and then we start doing symmetric encryption for the main transmission, and then periodically they will go back to asymmetric encryption to update the symmetric key so that you're not using the same symmetric key the entire time, right? That answers most people's problems with latency with encryption of traffic. That's as specific I can get without knowing the specifics of your system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just asking
Yep.
general
Yeah. Yeah, but that's not the way encryption works, right? If you have control data like this and you encrypt it, unless you're using the wrong encryption, the data doesn't become this big. The data stays this big. That's why I say is transmission latency tends to not be an issue because of encryption. It's the building of that packet that has latency. So the system on the satellite that is taking that data has to either encrypt it or decrypt it. That action adds a level of latency, right? And that's why I say is, that's why you're going to start with asymmetric and move to symmetric because symmetric's faster. Right? But transmission should not be impacted by encryption. I think I'm saying that right. Yeah. Yes, sir.
because everything's AI now and I just want to know, because you're amazing. It was a really good talk.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
How is AI going to impact your business?
How is AI going to impact my
Because
business?
it's coding and, you know what I mean, replacing coders with some...
Yeah. When we have AI, my business will be very different. We don't have AI yet. Do you know the difference between machine learning and AI? No. Do you?
No.
So machine learning is written in Python, and AI is written in PowerPoint. Right now, AI is marketing. Yes, I believe, and we'll use the nomenclature AI because people are doing it, right? Yeah. But for me, AI is an augmentation of what I do, right? It is just a different tool for me. Right now, I'm not worried about AI replacing my testers. And I know that's not what you're asking. I'm just saying. And so...
In terms of the cube satellite, right?
Yeah.
You've got to go through all that code. Will that be a tool that can help you?
It already is. It is already a tool that helps me with this. I don't leverage AI, like, there are pen test companies that use AI tools to do the pen test. The AI tool is actually launching attacks. We will not do that. And the reason we won't do that is people pay us because of our expertise. AI doesn't have that expertise, right? And I hate to say that because I feel conceited to say that. Like, people pay us because we're friggin' smart. You know what I mean? Like, that just seems rude. I'm sorry?
Medical industry, when they have like breast cancer, breast testing,
Yeah.
they have AI now looking at it, but they still have a human being who has to sign off on it because you can't sue a computer.
Exactly. For us, we're not having the AI look at the systems. One is contractual reasons. Two is because I don't think it's the right thing to do. We use AI to help us understand different things, to leverage, like our report review type stuff is run through. It's a tool. It augments what we do. That make sense?
Can you hang for a couple minutes if
Yeah,
there are additional
I can hang
questions?
out.
All right,
Yeah.
we're gonna wrap now. I want to thank Kevin for his time, and by all means,
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.